Hello, bridge builders! I'm here with some exciting news. The first volume of interviews is now available on Amazon.com. The link can be found at eatlunchandboardgame.com. I promise that all proceeds from sales of this book will go right back into this podcast and channel. Whether that is new and better audio equipment for the podcast or video equipment for the YouTube channel, or even more games to review, the money will not be wasted. Click over to Amazon and get your copy of Eat Lunch and Board Game, the first course today. And thank you for supporting the show. In this episode, author Mary Pilon joins me to talk about her amazing book, The Monopolists, Obsession, Fury, and the Scandal Behind the World's Favorite Board Game. It is one of my favorite books about board game history. Mary spent 5 years doing research on the history of Monopoly and its actual origins. She met a lot of great people and produced a great book. It is simply amazing, and you should find it, read it, and enjoy it like I have. We talk about the usual stuff, as well as her receiving her original Nintendo system for Christmas, our shortcomings at playing chess, and her love for Bananagrams. A quick note before we get into this episode: I did not know my microphone was recording awkwardly. I apologize for my sound, but don't worry though, Mary still sounds great. It was just my mic. Thanks for listening.
Alright, welcome back to Eat Lunch and Board Game. I'm your host, Adam Collins. And joining me today is author Mary Pilon, who wrote the book The Monopolists, Obsession, Fury, and the Scandal Behind the World's Favorite Board Game. Mary, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh man, so your book is one of my favorites to read. I don't know why, I was just telling you before we started recording that I've read it 2 times. I thought when I contacted you that I had quote-unquote weeks before you were going to be available, so I tried to read it a 3rd time, and you came back and said, hey, how's 4 days from now work? And I have not gotten through it the 3rd time. But I do really enjoy the book. There's so much good information and history behind Monopoly that a lot of people just don't know.
Well, thank you. There's no better testament than people actually reading. I'm a big believer in getting people to read anything as much as possible. But to say someone's read your book that's not a blood relative or a student in its required reading is really meaningful, let alone 2 or 3 times. So that means a lot.
No, I love it. And I think what drew me to it was I read something about like I guess the best word, sordid past of Monopoly. And as I dug into it, your book came up, and I'm like, well, I mean, I'll give that a read. So what drew you to the story of Lizzie McGee?
Sure. So the whole book was an accident. I, in 2009, was working at the Wall Street Journal, and I was covering business in Wall Street and trading floors. And as I'm sure you remember, in 2009, that was quite a nutty year to be doing that. I kind of had stumbled into business reporting, but I've always been fascinated by money. I think money and business is actually a psychology beat in a lot of ways. It's about how we behave, how we think. And I was just riveted by, I felt like working at the Journal, I had this front row seat to a pivotal moment in capitalism. Like, it's very unusual to be like, I am in a moment in history and this is crazy. And I was going to mention in passing in an article, a lot of people, including, Ben Bernanke, of course, were making comparisons to the Great Depression. So there was a lot of journalists and authors and policymakers were looking back to the 1930s and, what decisions were made, what worked, what didn't work, et cetera. And I was going to mention in passing, blah, 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 Monopoly that was invented during the Great Depression, because my family's tradition is we played every Christmas Eve. We still do. And I grew up in Oregon, so it was rainy all the time. We had a lot of indoor recesses and a lot of indoor gaming time. And that was the version of Monopoly's history that was tucked into my family's game board. And so I started looking around, and this was again back in 2009. I know this may shock you, but there were things on the internet that were inconsistent and that didn't feel accurate to me, or that weren't aligned. And I felt like an idiot, to be honest with you, because here I was at the Wall Street Journal writing about derivatives and mortgage-backed securities and these like complex financial instruments. And the sentence about the board game, I couldn't nail down. And it was so embarrassing because if you work at the Journal, and I say this lovingly, I really love my colleagues there, it's like working with like a bunch of super genius, like really, really smart people. So if you can't figure out the thing about the board game, then you just feel like an idiot. Everyone was really nice though. But and I just and I was like, it's so weird. I'm calling people and they're weird about this. Like this should be this thing that people should be excited to talk about. And of course, like, your journal, like my journalistic instincts are when people start getting weirded out about talking about something, I'm like, oh, it means I'm onto something, right? Like there's a taboo and it's about monopoly of all things. Like, you expect that when you report on certain things or secrets, but this wasn't one of them. And on a whim, I had reached out to Ralph Anspach. And the reason he got on my radar is I use this reporting trick that I learned from some of my colleagues where you call counterparties in lawsuits, especially with investigative work. You're always looking for documents. And if you're suing someone or being sued by someone, you might know something about them. And I had seen that Ralph, I found his website, which hadn't been updated in a long time. And I had seen that he'd been involved in litigation with Parker Brothers back in the 70s. And I was like, I don't know what this guy's deal is. I don't know if he's still involved in the company or whatever. So I just reached out on a whim and I said, hey, I know this sounds crazy. I'm a reporter at the Journal. I'm just trying to find out the truth about Monopoly. And God love him. He immediately got back to me and was like, oh, I waited 40 years for someone to ask me about this. It's all a lie. It was invented by a woman. And I went to the Supreme Court to fight this. And that hatched open what ultimately became an article for the Journal and then the book proposal and then the book. So I owe my knowledge of Lizzie McGee and the entire history of Monopoly to Ralph. And there's no way that we would be sitting here talking about it if not for him and his detective work.
Yeah, Ralph Anspach, the founder or creator of Anti-Monopoly, who then got sued and then he sued back and fought for his rights to produce a game called Anti-Monopoly.
Yes.
And that was quite a litigation. I have his book as well.
Oh, you're in it. I love it.
I'm still in it. It's kind of it's an obsession and a passion, I guess. But yeah, and so yeah, Ralph Anspach had the Anti-Monopoly game, which is on its second or third publishing or box or whatever now. But yeah, that's quite the story too. And Lizzie McGee and all of her Georgist philosophy and the single tax and how the game Monopoly started off as the landlord's game, which was to show how bad capitalism is. And then you think about the game Monopoly and how it's about being the best capitalist there is.
Absolutely. I mean, the irony is amazing to me. And for, the 5 years I was working on the book, to be honest with you, I just felt like a nut job. I felt like I was like this Monopoly conspiracy theorist because you'd go to any cocktail party and people would just be like, oh, Monopoly, the game invented by the Great Depression. I was like, no, there's more to it. And then when you work on something that long, it also just becomes kind of sad. Like people are like, oh, you look a little pale. Have you been out? You're like, why are you obsessing about this game? And so now that the book is out there and people know who she is and know the story and it's traveled around, it's made my life a lot easier. And the fact that she got a patent for the landlord's game, which she received in 1904, is also incredible. This was before women could vote. She was a really incredible woman in her own right and had worn many hats. She was an activist. She was an impassioned follower of Henry George. She was a big political thinker. She had written poetry and short stories. And her father, James McGee, had traveled with Abraham Lincoln during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And when I was setting out to do the book, I had this oh crap moment, as many, journalists do, where I was like, I have to write a story about a woman who's famous for being unknown. And that is a research nightmare. And unlike my work at the Journal or the Times, you can't just pick up the phone and call these people. Like she died in 1948. She didn't have any kids or direct descendants. And so the things that she did leave behind, the writing I had just mentioned, newspaper articles about her that were like it was like chasing and, finding a needle in a haystack, and her game patents, patents are documents as well. And they tell us a story, were so invaluable to me. And I really felt like when I was really stuck in this book, and I was stuck multiple times, I thought, no one else is going to tell this woman's story. Ralph discovered her because a lot of his fate in court hinged on proving who she was. But I felt like I had to kind of do like her mini biography because she is the lifeblood of the game. It all starts with her, and she was systematically erased from the history. So I thought it was important to know who she was as a human being and then understand, well, what forces prevented her story from being told for so long. And we're so lucky that this kind of serendipitous set of circumstances rose it from the dead, so to speak. I mean, one of the things I love about the story is that Ralph and Lizzie never met. They were barely alive at the same time, but they have these like parallel and kind of sometimes parallel and sometimes overlapping lines as characters. And I think that's one of the coolest things about history is that, not to get too like woo, but like when people die, they don't go away. The world is made up of things that people leave behind, or so the lineage of the game, which is, over a century now, connects all these different characters in a way that kind of reminds me of like the Red Violin, or it was a nightmare to structure the book because I had to figure out like how to do it. But once I got it, I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting, because I think that's also how the world works. And I kind of like that idea. I like that idea that, I think it's really sad that when Lizzie died in 1948, she has this like itty bitty little obituary. No one really credited her with the game. If anything, she was kind of branded as a crackpot. And then now I get emails from like teenage girls learning coding who are like, she's this amazing inspiration to me. And so I think there's something kind of cool about that. Like legacies can have these like longer tales to them.
No, absolutely. You did a great job. Like I said, I'm on my third time through the book. Um, it's an incredible story that more people need to know and need to understand. But also, like, people also don't like to, they like to crap on Monopoly. But man, what a game! Like
What a game.
You can sit there and say how it's a terrible game. It has lived a very long life. And
Absolutely.
it's coming up on 100 years. That's why, that's why,
More than.
yeah, yeah. But now it's why they're kicking out a new version seems like every other week, some new version of Monopoly. The builder,
which is so
the
funny
secret
because the new versions, which are made through a license with Hasbro usually, what I find so funny about that is it's actually bringing the game back to its folk origins. If we were playing this game in the early 1900s, pre Parker Brothers, them buying the game in 1935, you would have localized it. You would have put your alma mater on there. You would have put, Boston if you were playing in Boston. You would have put Chicago, the Loop if you were in Chicago. We know that people did that. And so it's funny to me that we've come full circle in a way. And people
yeah.
expect me like, I mean, I love games, but the analogy I always use is, to me, Monopoly is the Model T. And if we didn't have the Model T, we wouldn't have Tesla, right? We wouldn't have hybrids. We wouldn't have all these other cars. But I'm glad I don't drive a Model T down a California highway, And I think Monopoly really changed the gaming industry. And it changed it technically, it changed it commercially, changed it in a lot of ways. But is it a perfect game? No. Like there's other games like, that I enjoy, like, and we could go in, and I get a lot of questions about the morality of it and what it teaches kids. And I think those are all really valid conversations, but I'm not like this, like, oh, Monopoly's the best game ever. I think it's like, and I think the thing that blows me away about it as a game and as a story is it's so American. It's so distinctly a product of this country, then and now, and every part of its story to me illustrates some flavor of that.
Oh, absolutely. And that, yeah. And then even in like was it the 40s or 50s when they started their partnership with Waddington's and the transatlantic, partnership that they created, because Waddington's did all the games over there in England and the European area. And so, if it weren't for Monopoly, we wouldn't be where we are today. Love it or hate it, I love it. I have so many different copies of it. I might have ordered one today because it was on sale. It was the Avatar. Come on, the Last Airbender version, might as well get it, right? But if it weren't for, Monopoly, like you said, without the Model T, we wouldn't be where we are with cars. And so you got to give Monopoly its due. But definitely the sordid history and all the 5 years of your life that it took up. What a great story you got out of the end of it, though. And
Thank you.
highly recommend it. Definitely read the book because you need to. So, how did you get into gaming? Was it Monopoly when you were a kid?
Yes. We, like I said, my family played Monopoly. I have an older brother, and I remember the Christmas we got Nintendo. And the world was never the same. And this is such a big brother story, and I don't think he'll be pissed if I share this, but he would do this thing because no sibling wants to share video game time, right? So he would do this thing where he would give me the second controller, but not plug it in.
That's like it.
And so when I was a kid, I was like, I'm awesome at Mario. And then like my parents would walk in and be like, what did you do? So, I'm obviously still a crappier player than he is. But yeah, I very much came of age in, the 80s and 90s era of gaming. So Nintendo, Atari, all of those games, Pac-Man. And then in terms of board games, we had all the standards. We had Monopoly and Scrabble and Clue. And then more recently, I think one of the coolest things that's happened that I couldn't have predicted is when I sold the book in 2009, everybody said to me, who cares about board games? Who cares? It's all video games, all video games. And obviously the video game industry is massive. It's a juggernaut. But because of, ironically, the internet, we're having this renaissance in, tabletop games, RPGs, all this stuff. Because now, if you had a friend in high school who knew D&D, great, you could learn it. But now you could just watch online and figure out how to play. And, you can join a campaign online. And so if you have a great idea, you don't need to sell it to a Parker Brothers. You can do a Kickstarter. I mean, look at Exploding Kittens, look at Cards Against Humanity. And so I think it's really cool that now kind of the gatekeepers of game publishing have changed so much from when I was a kid, so that now there's so much more out there. I mean, my mind is blown by all the things I can buy for my, nieces, nephews, cousins, etc., which is so, so cool.
So you mentioned Kickstarter. Do you get on there a lot?
Not as much as I used to. Yeah, I try to. Well, I try to because I think also as an author, like, and a creative, it's hard. I'm an independent. I hang, it's hard to get an idea off the ground, and I really admire the ambition of it. And I think, there's a lot of really wonderful ideas out there. And, who am I if I write a book about, a game as a critique of capitalism to not look at microlending a little bit. So I think it's just been awesome for the game world.
Yeah, no, I've been on there a lot, too much if you ask my wife. But I've run a couple Kickstarter campaigns for some board games. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword though, because it's brought the bar of down, which is also a lot of bad games to creep into the market.
Right. Yeah, but it's also interesting. Monopoly, one of the other things that makes Monopoly so unusual is that, as you know, a hit in the game industry is so rare. It's so, so hard. And to have something that comes back every generation or multi-generational is almost impossible. So yes, there are these games that you can kickstart and, there'll be a few hundred editions circulating. That's cool. That's great, actually. Yeah. But to have something like even Catan, right, which is probably the most recent, I think of all the tabletop games out there now, probably the one that has the best shot at being multi-generational. And also from a design standpoint, I think there's a compelling argument to be made that it's much more sophisticated in what it teaches than Monopoly. But I don't know if we would have Catan without Monopoly.
Yeah, I don't know, but I agree. That's definitely going to be the one. I mean, what people don't realize is that was done in 95.
Yeah, so that's a great point.
Up on 30.
It took a while to get from Klaus Huber's brain out into the world, but thank goodness it did.
No, absolutely. That's what dragged me back into gaming, because when I played games, like, it was Monopoly. We had tons of Monopoly tournaments in college. Like, we played on the dorm floor. We'd have like dorm rooms, and then if you finished first, you went to this room, and second was to that room. Oh, we played so much Monopoly. But that was early 2000s, so that was before Catan really made it over here. And then my brother's 6 years younger than me, and he's the one that he played it a lot. And then so now the badge of honor is being able to beat him at Catan, but I still haven't done it. But that's not the point. I'll get there eventually. But yeah, to see that it's still relevant, still coming out with new expansions, still coming out with new versions. And here we are, like I said, almost 30 years later, is a testament to that game. So
absolutely.
If I made the journey to LA, what is your current favorite game? What game are you playing?
Can I be honest?
Yeah.
So I've had a couple of long weekends away, holidays, etc. And you know what game is an unsung hero and never fails is Bananagrams. And here's what I love about Bananagrams, that I think I love Scrabble, but I think people who don't know Scrabble get very intimidated by it. It's too daunting. I think that a lot of people feel similarly about Monopoly. They've had traumatizing experiences with it. Bananagrams is like, give me 5 minutes, and then hours pass. And I think it rewards, because Scrabble, I think, is actually a math game, masked as a word game. Um, and if you play Scrabble against someone who's good, it is really crappy. Like
Oh, sure.
it's not fun. And so I think like in my, in the short attention span world that we're living in, I really try to grab people to do a proper game of Catan, or it's just hard. And I think Bananagrams has been the thing that I just throw it in like, my bag or whatever. And people are never not in a mood to play it. And it's fast paced enough and stressful enough that you get some adrenaline, but it's approachable, easy, charming. So honestly, I feel like that's what I've played the most in the last 6 months, which is funny because it's been on my shelf forever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the pandemic will do that to you. It'll change your usual what you're usually doing. Because the job I worked at when the pandemic started, we played a ton of Catan. I mean, like we had a traveling Catan trophy and everything that went to whoever won, and then we'd have multiple games going, which you had to be in the championship table to take the title. It was the whole thing.
That's so funny. Yeah. My family probably most consistently plays Catan. Like Catan. Did we settle?
It's Catan. I was going to ask you. It's one of my questions, but you said Catan, so I've already marked it down.
Catan. Is that like tomato, tomato?
It is.
I can spell it, which in my business is what really matters. So,
I was thinking about that meme on Facebook that has like Godzilla and King Kong, and it's like readers, the people that can spell the name of the character, and then it has King Kong. It says the people that audiobook it can pronounce it.
Oh, so Lord. And podcasting is where we crash.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I don't know how to say anything.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So when you play a game other than Monopoly, because it doesn't have colors, but if you play a game that has colors, do you have a specific color that you like to play as?
No. Often it's red. I'm the youngest sibling, so I always felt like red or brighter colors. I'm thinking of Clue specifically, actually. Because that was like my little chance at asserting myself. But I'm not super rigid about it. That's a great question.
Yeah. Thank you. You should write a book about Clue, because that has another really weird history to that one.
It does indeed.
Yeah, that poor guy took the lump sum payout and oops.
Has a lot of parallels. I don't know if there's a book in it, but
there's a good solid 150 pages.
Good luck.
Little novella, side hustle.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's another interesting game back in the day, and that one's originated in Europe, and it was part of one of the swap deals they did with Waddington. So,
and it's way more violent than people remember. Like I think there was arsenic and a bomb in the original. I feel like this is in my book.
Yeah,
and I think that's always. And the game of life is way more dark and violent. So again, going back to games, yes, the Milton Bradley one. Going back to games as cultural artifacts. And I think this has changed since the book came out, but I remember I used to hear, I love comics and I love cartoons, like these horror stories of like, Schuster cartoons that would be shoved into like stop leaky pipes and stuff. You're just like, no, or like original Crazy Cats or whatever. Like you're like, these are art. They need to be preserved. They're really important. And I feel like games now, and I credit the Strong Museum and a lot of great institutions, and we use Game Center as well for like finally being like, these are collectible, these matter, and they're reflections of their times, just like books or film or any other media would be. And yeah, so I think those early games of Clue, and especially when you think about what was it to be in the UK in the 1940s, like that's fascinating to me, at least. Yeah. You don't need to have a PhD in history to be like, wow, like this is the game that was coming out as the bombs were, being dropped, or anyway.
Exactly. That's when they came up with it. And then, it was all about a murder, and they were like really afraid to release a game about a murder. Like, well, the murder's already happened. You're just trying to figure out how it happened. And now we've themed it with Golden Girls, trying to figure out who ate the last piece of cheesecake. So,
well, but interestingly, like you're onto something really interesting. So I did a story in the spring of 2020 when we thought the pandemic was coming to a close, and it was about how Trump's grandfather had died in the flu pandemic, and the one we had a century ago. And one of the bizarre things that you learn when you study that pandemic is that nobody, like, if you look at music in the late teens and early 20s, there are no songs about the flu pandemic. There's no books. There, like, people just didn't want to talk about it. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that seems like a shame because history matters, the record matters. And now, like, I don't know what period we're in, but I'm like, I don't want to do a COVID book. I don't want to watch a COVID movie at night, but like that work really matters, obviously, in terms of documenting it. So I think when you think about games and the role they play and what people want out of games, and you kind of overlay that with history, it is kind of an interesting like thing. Like, oh, will people engage? Like, that's part of what Monopoly's history is so interesting is people said, well, why? What are the reasons they didn't think it would sell in the 1930s? Is first of all, people didn't have a lot of disposable income if they had any at all. And it's about real estate and money at a time when those were precisely the things that people were really struggling with.
Right.
But when you go back and you're like, oh, wait, the game actually started in the progressive era and is actually about trust and excess in the Gilded Age. And I think we very much live in a Gilded Age today. Like that changes the whole prism through which you view the game and how it really spread in the beginning, and that it spread among people who are critiquing all that. Sorry, that was kind of a tangent, but yeah, it was Monopoly related. I stayed on point.
Hey, there you go. So, that's what happens. You get off topic and then somehow circle back to it. You're like, hey, it's not bad. It's like a U-turn, kind of. So, do you play games at lunch, or do you have coworkers? Do you work from home?
I work from home with my dog. I have a co-working space, but alas, we don't game. And when you had reached out about the whole idea, I thought of lunch recess in Oregon because it rained all the time. And I remember the teacher, she would come and she would be like, you know what, it's raining. You can't go on the playground. And all the kids would groan and I would secretly be like, yes, like awesome. It was like such a nerd win. It was like I don't have to get beat in a dodgeball, like, or these other games I was just absolutely terrible at that involved like physical activity. Now that I read about sports, it's like hilarious. Anybody who knew me then, but it was board game time. So that's my
Oh
most
yeah,
like vivid like lunchtime gaming experience, I think.
nice. I mean, it's great. No, I remember those times. I grew up in Indiana. We had to worry about snow and rain and all that as well. And people try to teach me chess, and I'm like, why can't this piece go there? Well, that's not how it moves. Man, I don't get chess. And now my son is like 10 and, plays chess all the time and whoops my butt at it all the time. And I'm like, well, it's because I never freaking learned it. I was too busy trying to play checkers and try to fit a battleship game in or something. But
I'm in
yeah,
the
I never.
same boat. I love chess, but I'm terrible at it. That was like a pandemic skill I thought would sharpen, and I just never got around to it. And similarly, my nephew destroys me at it, which I'm proud of him for, but yeah, still
Yeah,
painful.
you need to get on that. What's that app my son has? It's something about Beat Magnus, and you're
Oh
like trying to play
yeah.
Magnus Carlsen at various stages of his life or something, and I'm like, nah, can I play him when he's like 4? I don't know. I'm not that great at chess. I know how to play it. I've gotten really good at just kind of getting into a holding pattern and trying to not lose.
Hey, defense will get you far. Although I will say a category, I don't know if these qualify as games or not, but I'm definitely on the Wordle train and I do the crossword. I've always loved crosswords, but I'm far more consistent at it than I ever have been. And really enjoy it. I think it really like calms me down. It gets me focused. Like it does something to my brain that I really enjoy.
If only I can remember that picture from the Yankees in the '60s.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Well, I have to plug a friend of mine, Adrian Raphael, wrote this wonderful book called Thinking Inside the Box. And it's all about the history of crosswords and kind of how they work and what it takes to build the puzzles and everything you'd ever want to know about crosswords. And so it was really fun to read that as a fan of crosswords for a really long time. So
oh,
if you want to
definitely
nerd
have
out,
to. Why not? You should see my bookshelf of board game books. I've got so many of them, but I've not read Thinking Inside the Box about crossword puzzles. I'm like, wrote that down, put that on my list of things
yeah, I
to
felt like
read.
this was a safe space. So
Yeah,
I went for it.
it probably is. That's a safe assumption you made there. So, what about if you did game at lunch, a go-to 60-minute game, a 1 hour game?
1 hour game. Hmm. Can you play Catan in an hour? Would that count?
I can all
Oh,
the time.
Ticket to Ride.
Oh,
We
there
haven't
you go.
talked about that. I feel like that would be the perfect lunch break. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
love that game.
it's so fun. There's so much different every game, and yet there's definite strategies or connections, we'll say, that if you can get, you can either help yourself or, more importantly, hinder your opponents.
Yes.
But Ticket to Ride's great. Alan Moon's book or game. I've got at least Ticket to Ride Europe. I don't think I have any of the other. Oh, I have the Rails and Sails. Have you ever played that one? Oh,
No, that sounds
oh my
awesome.
God! It is the board is just huge, and you have a combination of trains and boats, and you have to build routes across the globe.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you for helping me with my holiday shopping.
There you go. There you go. I I like it. It's a good one. You can't play it in an hour, but it's a good one. But yeah, Ticket to
Even
Ride's
better.
great. The new ones, I like the little city editions that they've been putting out. They're like the little micro box. They take about 20 minutes to play, 15 minutes to play. They're a lot of fun.
Also smart.
Yeah. Best
Yeah,
one
and
that is
I feel
London.
like when you play a game to the lunch break point, I haven't really thought about this way. I think about books this way. Like when I finish a really good book, I want to feel the same way that I do after I finish a really good meal. You know, I want to feel full and satisfied. I feel like after you play a good game, it's like that same like yes, like
Yeah.
there's like a heartiness to it um that I think is really I don't know,
Well,
satisfying.
I mean, but yeah, I understand because like when you play Katana, you get really close to the tenth point, and you got hidden points, and you're trying to calculate, then when it's over, you're like, oh, so close. But you feel like you've accomplished something, you've done something.
Mhm.
And Ticket to Ride, as you're tallying up all the points at the end, it's like, who's got it? Who's got enough points to go over the top and win this? I can see that. What about a 30-minute game, a lunch half hour?
30-minute game. Oh my goodness. You know, this is a surprising answer. Monopoly Deal. Even though Hasbro
Yeah,
won't admit a woman invented Monopoly, I have to hand it to them. I think Monopoly Deal they did a great job with. I think it's a great game. Um,
yeah, I
that's
have
probably
that
about
one.
30-minute game. I've never timed myself.
I don't think I've timed myself on that one either, but no, I that's a good one. It's
Or
been a while since I played it.
Bananagrams.
I was
Bananagrams.
waiting on you to say Bananagrams, but yeah,
Yeah. But that's also like
that's
a 5-minute game, you know, depending.
you can play multiple in 30 minutes. It's perfect.
Hmm.
Which
Exactly.
yeah, it's a good one. Which is funny that you came up with that as your current game is also like your hidden gem game because usually I ask what's the a hidden gem game, a game you don't think gets enough credit. That's exactly how you pitched Bananagram.
Absolutely. Hidden in plain sight gem.
It's funny how many of the hidden gems that my guests come up with, and I'm like, I've seen that game, but I've never thought to buy it or play it until somebody's like, oh yeah, this is great, and I'm like, well, I should probably go and find it.
A trend that I really love, that I was really worried about the pandemic killing, but by and large, I think has survived is so I, until very recently, lived in New York City, and there's the chess district, and you can go to where Bobby Fischer learned to play chess, and you can play chess, and it's amazing. And now because of a variety of factors, there's like board game coffee shops. So I wrote about the Uncommons, which is in the chess district. Actually, it's in an old chess, one of those old chess stores. There's
Yep.
Snakes and Lattes in Toronto. I feel like there's more of these popping up, and I think that's a really cool trend because first of all, it's community, it's all ages. I think it's a great way for coffee shops to stay sustainable as public spaces, which I think is really important. But it's also a great way to try a game before you, because
Yep.
I think that, if you're going to pay however much for a game, it's great to be able to try it out first and see, what you like or don't like and get exposure. So shout out to all the board game coffee shops
Yeah,
out there.
we have one here in St. Louis. It's called Pieces,
Oh,
and it's right downtown, right in the right by the farmers market, the big farmers market in Soulard.
that's awesome.
I go there a lot, mainly mainly to meet up with groups of friends and just try to get them to see that there's more games out there than Monopoly and Clue.
Well, it's also kind of hitting. So, David Sachs, who's another friend and colleague, he wrote a book about the rise of analog. And it's this idea that, we live in a more tech saturated world than ever. But why are people buying moleskins? Why are people playing board games? Why are people doing these, you know, I've got a typewriter here behind me that works, by the way. And I do think that there is something really wonderful about, you know, a board game is it forces people to engage with each other and be together, and you have kids, so you understand, but like I think it's true with adults too. And that's something that I think is really interesting too, that we now kind of crave that in a different way. And so I think having stores and spaces, or like, you know, I lived by Washington Square Park for years. The chess guys were always there. And I thought it was the coolest thing that this was like the common glue that brought tourists and locals, and games bring us together. This is also just like sports. And I think that's super cool.
Yeah. And you live right by those guys, and you never
Here's my
went
dog.
there. There he is. You live right by all those chess people, and you never went down there and had them teach you how to beat your nephew?
Oh my God, they would have destroyed. Like it's just, you know, at a certain point, you just have to like.
It would have been so nice and
I
helped you
paid
out.
for him to play. I was like, all right, I'll observe. I'm here for moral support. But I need to bone up with chess online a little bit before I really delve in. That's like saying like, oh, you never held a basketball? Why don't you go shoot some free throws with Steph Curry? It's like, no, like I gotta gotta work on my skills a little bit first, you know.
Now, you may not believe me, but I've actually read that book,
Which book?
The Return to Analog or
Oh,
whatever.
really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
A past guest was talking about it, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds awesome!" But yeah, another one they taught you going back to the Moleskins, the going back to vinyl records, and how they found all these old, dilapidated record presses, and then had to refurbish them and get them up and running to meet the demand of the vinyl these days, and talk about board games versus video games. And then another one I really enjoyed was the chapter on the Polaroid pictures
Yes. It's so
coming
funny
off
as you
the
were ticking that
digital.
off. I own a turntable. I own a Polaroid camera. Like maybe that's a board game thing. It seeps into all these other parts of your life.
Hey,
You know.
I've got a turntable. Mine's sitting. You can't see it. It's off camera right over there. But I've got a turntable. I buy a lot of records. Usually they're James Bond soundtracks or something silly like that, some nerd soundtrack, you know. But
So
I
funny.
got yeah, my record player sitting over there. I don't have a Polaroid camera. Obviously, I have a few board games or a few hundred. I'm not sure, but there's a lot. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that book because I'm like, I have read that book. That was a very fun book that I read as well. But it's an interesting time to be in board gaming and see all the different mechanics and all the what sticks, what doesn't, and the trends. I think we're finally through the zombie trend. I hope. I can't take another zombie game.
Yeah, God, I hadn't thought. Yeah, that was really again, and trust me, in 40, 50 years, someone will do whatever. It's not going to be podcasting. It'll be something we can't even conceive of, and they'll be like, "Well, in the pandemic, there was this obsession with zombie games. What was that about? You know, what were they working through there?"
Yeah, there was a lot of zombie games.
Yeah,
And a lot of them, from the eyes of the zombie, surviving zombie attacks. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, there's so many zombie games. I think I own one, maybe, but yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what the next big board game is, what the next big fad is in the board gaming industry. So, well, Mary, I'd like to thank you for being on my show today. It's been wonderful talking with you, and also to kind of geek out on Monopoly for a little bit.
anytime. Pleasure was mine.
So, your book, The Monopolists, where can people pick up a copy of that?
Sure. Links to all that are on my website, which is just my first and last name. It's Mary, MaryPilon .com. Internet. It's not a fad. I think it's going to be here for a bit. And you can get it at any major retailer, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Bookshop. So yeah, ebook, audiobook, all the books. Support your local bookstores though. I'm a big bookshop.org fan, especially in the holidays. It's good to support those stores. They're great.
It certainly is. And the audiobook is great. We were talking ahead of time how you like the narrator of it. It is well done. That's why I don't actually own a copy of your book, is because I had the audiobook through the library, and it's so easy just to hit play and go.
I'm a big consumer of audiobooks, but I have to tell you, and I'm not a memoirist, so having somebody else read your work when it's been in your head for a really long time is a really trippy experience. I mean, I don't know how it is for other authors, but for me, you're just like, oh my God, it just feels like Morgan Freeman's narrating your thoughts or something. Like, it's just very weird, especially because the people who do audiobooks are clearly professionally trained and have these incredible voices and stuff. And so it's just it's fun. It's really fun. So
That's not how I heard it when I was writing it. But that's all I hear. So that's awesome.
yeah, exactly.
So if you want to reach out to you, hit you up on your website,
Yes.
marypilon.org.com.
.org's in the works. I'll start my cult soon enough, but for now it's just me, me and my dog.
It's a small cult.
Yeah,
not
exactly.
too dangerous. Then, as usual, if you want to reach out to me, eatlunchandboardgame.com, podandbox.com/eatlunchandboardgame, or email me at eatlunchandboardgame@gmail.com. And remember, board games build bridges.
Please rate and leave a review wherever you listen. Jay Fry wrote, "Great viewpoint. I really appreciate that the show looks at board gaming through the lens of what could I play over a lunch break. More and more of us are struggling to work gaming into busy schedules, and this show does a good job of spotlighting what works in a 1 hour or less window of opportunity. Build those bridges, folks." Thank you, Jay Fry, for the review. I'm glad that you have found this podcast useful. Leave a review and I will read yours in a future episode.
When you're gaming, why not be comfy? Go over to supportplayer.org. Click on the cards, pieces, and dice to get some merch. These t-shirts are some of the most comfortable I have ever worn. That's supportplayer.org, and there's a link on eatlunchandboardgame.com.